There comes a moment in life when staying feels safer than leaving, but leaving is the only way your soul can breathe. If you have ever felt guilty for outgrowing people you once loved, if you've ever questioned why distance keeps showing up in your life, then stay with me, because what you are about to hear may finally explain why your growth feels lonely and why it must. Growth is rarely gentle. It does not arrive wrapped in reassurance or comfort. It does not whisper soothing lies to keep you where you are. Growth disrupts, it unsettles, it challenges everything you thought was stable and asks you to look again. Many people believe that when life becomes uncomfortable, something has gone wrong. But discomfort is often the first sign that something deep and necessary is finally taking place. Comfort is familiar, it is predictable, it is the warm repetition of what you already know how to survive. Growth, on the other hand, asks you to step beyond survival and into possibility. And possibility is frightening because it has no guarantees. The moment you begin to grow, the routines that once fit start to feel tight. Conversations that once felt easy begin to feel empty. Environments that once held you begin to feel heavy. This is not betrayal by life. This is life urging you forward. Every meaningful transformation begins with disruption. The ground must shake before new foundations can be laid. The old structure cannot remain intact if something stronger is to rise. Growth disturbs comfort because comfort resists change. Comfort prefers stillness over movement, certainty over truth, and safety over purpose. But purpose has never been comfortable. Purpose stretches you. It calls you into spaces where your voice trembles and your confidence must be rebuilt from within. There is a quiet fear that surfaces when comfort is disturbed. It sounds like doubt. It sounds like hesitation. It asks, why can't things stay the same? But staying the same is often the greatest risk of all. When comfort becomes your ceiling, growth becomes your rebellion. And rebellion against stagnation is not chaos, it is courage. Growth forces you to question what you once accepted without thought. It asks you to examine beliefs you inherited, habits you repeated, and roles you played to belong. Comfort tells you to remain agreeable, familiar, and easy to understand. Growth tells you to become honest, even when honesty changes how others see you. This is why growth can feel lonely. When you evolve, not everyone evolves with you, and that separation can feel like loss, even when it is necessary. Discomfort is the language growth speaks most fluently. It speaks through restlessness, through dissatisfaction, through the sense that something is no longer enough. Many people silence this language by numbing themselves with routine, distraction, or the approval of others. But when you ignore discomfort, you postpone growth. You delay the life that is trying to emerge through you. There is no expansion without pressure. Just as muscles grow by being challenged beyond their limits, the spirit grows when it is pushed beyond its comfort zone. Pressure reveals strength you did not know you had. It teaches resilience. It sharpens clarity. It strips away illusions and leaves behind what is real. Comfort keeps you protected. Growth makes you powerful. When growth begins, it often feels like things are falling apart, but in truth, they are falling into place. Old attachments loosen, old fears surface, old identities crumble. This can feel like chaos, but it is actually reorganization. Life is rearranging itself to make room for something larger, something truer, something more aligned with who you are becoming. Many people mistake peace for comfort, but peace is not the absence of challenge. Peace is alignment with truth, and truth will challenge you. Growth disturbs comfort because it refuses to let you live a lie, even a comfortable one. It insists that you confront what no longer serves you, even if letting go hurts. There is bravery in choosing growth when comfort calls you back. Comfort will remind you of what you could lose. Growth will remind you of what you could become. Comfort whispers, "At least you know this." Growth asks, "But is this enough?" That question alone has the power to change a life. The discomfort of growth is temporary, but the cost of avoiding it is permanent. When you choose comfort over growth, you may feel safe, but you also feel small. When you choose growth over comfort, you may feel afraid, but you also feel alive. There is a difference between being comfortable and being fulfilled. Fulfillment requires risk, it requires faith, it requires movement. Growth does not promise ease, but it promises expansion. It promises depth. It promises a life that feels authentic rather than convenient. Every time you feel discomfort rising, pause before you retreat. Ask yourself whether this discomfort is harm or transformation. Often it is transformation knocking, asking to be let in. You were never meant to stay the same. You were meant to unfold, layer by layer, season by season. And each unfolding will disturb the comfort of the last. This is not failure. This is evolution. Growth will continue to disturb your comfort until you stop mistaking comfort for destiny and start honoring the call to become more. Separation is one of the most misunderstood experiences in the human journey. When people drift apart, when relationships loosen their grip, when familiar faces no longer walk beside us, the first instinct is to assume rejection. The mind rushes to blame, to shame, to the painful belief that something was not enough. But separation is rarely about unworthiness. More often, it is about alignment quietly correcting the course of a life. Alignment does not announce itself loudly. It does not come with explanations that satisfy the ego. It simply begins to move what no longer fits out of the way. When two paths are no longer headed in the same direction, closeness becomes strain. Conversations feel forced. Shared spaces feel heavy. The connection that once flowed easily begins to require effort. This is not because love disappeared, but because purpose shifted. Many people confuse being needed with being aligned. They stay in relationships where they are useful but not seen, familiar but not supported, present but not growing. Alignment, however, asks a different question. Does this connection allow both people to become more of who they are meant to be? When the answer quietly becomes no, separation begins its work. Separation is not a verdict on your character. It is not a punishment for changing. It is a natural response to evolution. As you grow, your values sharpen, your boundaries strengthen, your tolerance for what drains you decreases. What once felt acceptable begins to feel misaligned. The space between who you are becoming and what surrounds you becomes impossible to ignore. Separation is simply the space adjusting itself to your truth. There is grief in this process, even when separation is healthy. Loss does not only come from endings filled with conflict, it also comes from endings filled with understanding. Letting go of people you still care about is one of the most mature forms of love. It requires the courage to accept that closeness without alignment eventually becomes harm, not connection. Alignment is honest, and honesty can feel cruel to those who prefer comfort. When you choose alignment, you may be labeled distant, changed, or difficult. But what others call distance is often self-respect taking shape. What they call change is growth becoming visible. And what they call difficulty is your refusal to betray yourself to keep others comfortable. Separation often happens quietly. There is no argument, no dramatic ending, no final conversation that explains everything. There is simply a gradual loosening, a natural fading. This can be unsettling because the mind wants closure. But alignment does not always provide neat endings. Sometimes it only provides clarity through distance. It is important to understand that not every connection is meant to last forever. Some people enter your life to teach you something, not to stay with you indefinitely. When the lesson is learned, the connection changes. Holding on beyond that point does not deepen the bond, it distorts it. Alignment knows when a season has ended, even when the heart is still catching up. There is also a deeper truth hidden within separation. Sometimes people cannot follow you where your life is going, not because they lack love, but because the path ahead demands a version of you that no longer fits the roles you once played. When you stop shrinking, explaining, or compromising your truth, those who benefited from your silence may feel uncomfortable. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. Separation reveals who was connected to your essence and who was connected to your availability. When you are always present, always giving, always accommodating, many relationships thrive on what you provide rather than who you are. Alignment disrupts this dynamic. It removes access where there is no reciprocity. And this can feel like rejection to those who were never truly aligned with you in the first place. There is a sacred loneliness that accompanies alignment. It is the quiet space between what has ended and what has not yet arrived. This space can feel empty, but it is actually fertile. It is where discernment grows. It is where your voice becomes clearer without the noise of misaligned influences. Separation creates room for relationships that meet you where you are, not where you used to be. It is tempting to chase people when separation begins, to explain yourself, to seek reassurance that you are still accepted. But alignment does not require validation. It requires trust. Trust that what is leaving is making space for what belongs. Trust that what remains is strong enough to support your becoming. Separation also teaches self-reliance. When familiar support systems shift, you are invited to develop inner stability. You learn to stand without leaning on what no longer holds you. This is not isolation. It is independence of spirit. It is the realization that your worth is not determined by who stays, but by how honestly you live. Some separations are temporary, others are permanent. Both serve a purpose. Temporary separation allows reflection and recalibration. Permanent separation allows liberation. In either case, alignment is the guiding force. It is always moving you toward wholeness, even when the path feels lonely. It is also essential to release the belief that separation means failure. Relationships are not only successful if they last forever. Some are successful because they end at the right time. They end before resentment replaces respect, before obligation replaces care, before staying becomes a form of self-betrayal. Ending with honesty is not loss, it is wisdom. Alignment is not about becoming better than others. It is about becoming truer to yourself. And truth has a way of rearranging your world. When you choose alignment, your circle may become smaller, but it also becomes clearer. The energy around you becomes lighter. The connections that remain feel nourishing rather than draining. As separation invites you to examine your patterns, are you holding on out of fear or love? Are you staying to avoid loneliness or to honor connection? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are necessary. Alignment begins with self-awareness and is sustained by self-respect. There will be moments when separation hurts deeply, when memories resurface, when you question whether you made the right choice. In those moments, remember that alignment often feels like loss before it feels like freedom. The heart needs time to adjust to what the soul already knows. As you continue to align with your values, your purpose, and your truth, separation becomes less frightening. You begin to see it not as something happening to you, but as something happening for you. It becomes a signal that you are listening to yourself, that you are honoring your growth, that you are choosing integrity over attachment. Separation is not rejection. It is alignment, restoring balance. It is life clearing the path so you can walk forward without resistance. It is not an ending, but a recalibration. And every recalibration brings you closer to a life that fits, not just comfortably, but truthfully. Expansion does not happen in crowded places. It does not flourish where every corner of your life is already occupied by expectations, noise, and obligations that belong to an older version of you. Growth may begin within, but expansion requires space around you, space to stretch, to breathe, to imagine beyond the limits of what has already been defined. Without space, even the strongest vision suffocates. Many people try to grow while keeping everything exactly the same. They want new outcomes without new environments, deeper peace without releasing what drains them, higher purpose without creating room for it to exist. But expansion is not an addition. It is a reconfiguration. Something must move for something greater to enter. Space is not emptiness, it is invitation. Space begins internally before it shows up externally. When your mind is crowded with other people's opinions, old fears, and inherited beliefs, there is no room for clarity. Expansion asks you to quiet the noise long enough to hear your own voice. This can feel unsettling at first. Silence exposes what distraction has been hiding, but within that silence, truth becomes audible. There is a reason life often slows you down before it lifts you up. The pause is not punishment, it is preparation. Expansion requires reflection, and reflection needs room. When you are constantly busy, constantly available, constantly responding, you leave no space to respond intentionally. Growth may still happen under pressure, but expansion needs openness. Creating space often means letting go of what once felt necessary. Not everything you carry is required for the next chapter. Some habits were formed to survive, not to thrive. Some commitments were made from fear, not alignment. Space asks you to examine what you hold and why you hold it. This examination can be uncomfortable because release always feels like loss before it feels like relief. Space also challenges identity. When you step back from familiar roles, you may feel unanchored. You may wonder who you are without constant productivity, without being needed, without fulfilling expectations. But this unanchoring is essential. Expansion cannot be built on identities that no longer reflect your truth. Space allows you to meet yourself without performance. There is a deep resistance many people feel towards space because space feels uncertain. Crowded lives feel safe because they are predictable. Even if they are exhausting, they are known. Space, however, introduces the unknown. It asks you to trust what has not yet taken form. Expansion always lives in that trust. Without it, growth remains confined to what feels manageable rather than what feels meaningful. Space is also relational. As you expand, some connections naturally loosen, not because of conflict, but because of capacity. You can no longer hold everything and everyone at the same level of priority. This is not cruelty, it is clarity. Expansion requires discernment. It teaches you that depth is more valuable than quantity, and presence is more powerful than proximity. There is a difference between being alone and having space. Loneliness feels like absence. Space feels like potential. When you begin to create space, you may mistake it for isolation. But if you stay with it, you will discover that space is where your creativity returns, where your intuition strengthens, where your energy stabilizes. Space is not empty, it is alive. Expansion also requires physical and emotional space from environments that keep you small. Places carry memory, they hold patterns. Remaining in the same environment while trying to become someone new can feel like swimming against a current. Sometimes space means changing surroundings. Sometimes it means redefining boundaries within them. In either case, expansion needs an environment that does not constantly remind you of who you used to be. One of the hardest forms of space to create is emotional space. This means no longer reacting to everything, no longer absorbing emotions that are not yours, no longer carrying responsibility for outcomes you cannot control. Emotional space is maturity. It allows you to respond with intention rather than impulse. And intention is the foundation of expansion. Space also protects your energy. When your life is overcrowded, your energy is fragmented. You are everywhere but present nowhere. Expansion requires focused energy. It requires the ability to sit with a thought long enough for it to evolve, to commit to a direction long enough for it to take shape. Space gathers your energy instead of scattering it. There is a quiet power that emerges when you honor space. You begin to notice what truly matters. Your decisions become clearer. Your yes becomes more intentional. Your no becomes more confident. Expansion is not about doing more. It is about making room for what aligns. Space teaches patience. Expansion does not rush. It unfolds at a pace that allows integration. When you move too quickly without space, you carry old patterns into new situations. Space allows those patterns to dissolve before the next chapter begins. This is why pauses are often necessary between transitions. They are not delays, they are refinements. Many people fear space because they worry nothing will fill it. But life responds to openness. When you clear space with honesty, something always arrives. Sometimes clarity, sometimes opportunity, sometimes peace. What arrives may not look like what you expected, but it will reflect the space you created. Expansion requires faith in what you cannot yet see. Space is the evidence of that faith. It is the willingness to release what is known in order to receive what is true. This willingness is not weakness, it is strength. It takes courage to trust that what is meant for you will find you when you stop overcrowding your life with what is not. As you learn to create and protect space, you begin to expand naturally. Not through force, but through alignment. Not through struggle, but through openness. Space becomes the ground where your next becoming takes root. And once you understand this, you stop fearing space and start honoring it as the doorway to everything you are growing into. Guilt often arrives quietly when you begin to outgrow what once felt like home. It does not announce itself as wrongdoing. It disguises itself as loyalty, responsibility, or kindness. It asks why you are changing, why you no longer fit where you once belonged, why you cannot stay the same for the comfort of others. This guilt is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is the emotional cost of becoming someone new. Outgrowing familiarity means stepping away from patterns that shaped you. These patterns may have once protected you, given you identity, or provided a sense of belonging. When you move beyond them, a part of you feels like you are betraying your past. Guilt rises because familiarity feels like obligation. It tells you that you owe your old self, your old relationships, your old environments the right to remain unchanged. But growth does not negotiate with familiarity. It moves forward, whether permission is granted or not. There is comfort in being known as you were. Familiarity offers predictability. People expect certain behaviors, certain reactions, certain roles from you. When you outgrow these expectations, you disrupt the unspoken agreements that kept everything running smoothly. Guilt emerges because disruption feels like harm, even when it is necessary. You may feel responsible for others' discomfort, as if your growth has created an imbalance you are required to fix. This guilt is intensified when your change is quiet. There is no dramatic reason to point to, no clear wrongdoing to justify your departure. You simply feel different. You think differently, you need differently, and because there is no obvious cause, guilt fills the gap. It whispers that you are being ungrateful, that you are abandoning what once supported you. But gratitude does not require permanence. Appreciation does not demand stagnation. Outgrowing familiarity often means redefining love. Love that is rooted in closeness alone struggles when growth introduces distance. You may still care deeply, but you can no longer participate in the same way. Guilt arises because society often equates love with constant presence. But mature love understands seasons. It recognizes that connection can change form without losing meaning. There is also guilt in choosing yourself after years of choosing others. When you have built your identity around being dependable, accommodating, or self-sacrificing, growth can feel selfish. The moment you prioritize your well-being, your boundaries, your truth, guilt surfaces as resistance. It challenges your right to choose differently. Yet choosing yourself is not abandonment. It is survival evolving into self-respect. Guilt thrives on comparison between who you were and who you are becoming. It asks you to measure your current needs against your past commitments, often ignoring the growth that occurred in between. You are not the same person who made those commitments. Expecting yourself to remain unchanged is an unrealistic demand. Growth alters capacity, desire, and direction. Guilt simply marks the distance traveled. Familiar environments amplify guilt because they reflect your former self back to you. Old places, old routines, old conversations remind you of who you used to be. When you no longer resonate with them, you may feel like an outsider in spaces that once defined you. Guilt arises because familiarity tells you that belonging should feel effortless. But belonging that requires self-erasure is not belonging, it is compliance. There is a hidden fear beneath guilt, the fear of being misunderstood. When you outgrow familiarity, people may not recognize you anymore. They may question your motives or interpret your distance as rejection. Guilt pushes you to explain, to justify, to shrink back into what is understandable. But growth does not always come with language others can grasp. Sometimes it only comes with boundaries. Guilt is also tied to memory. You remember the support you received, the moments of connection, the times when familiarity felt like safety. These memories are real and valuable, but memory should not dictate the future. Honoring the past does not require living in it. Growth honors the past by building upon it, not by staying confined within it. As you continue to grow, guilt becomes a signal rather than a verdict. It signals that you are crossing an internal threshold. It indicates that you are choosing truth over habit. Guilt does not mean you should turn back. It means you are leaving something that once mattered. And leaving what mattered will always carry emotional weight. The challenge is learning to hold guilt without letting it control your decisions. Guilt can coexist with clarity. You can feel sadness without surrendering your direction. You can feel compassion without sacrificing your evolution. Growth asks you to carry guilt gently, not to obey it blindly. Over time, familiarity loosens its grip. What once felt like obligation begins to feel like memory. Guilt softens as you settle into alignment. You realize that your growth did not destroy anything valuable. It simply changed the form of your connections. Some relationships adapt, others fade. Both outcomes are natural. Outgrowing familiarity is not a betrayal of where you came from. It is an acknowledgement of where you are going. Guilt is the emotional residue of transition. It lingers at the doorway between past and future. When you understand this, you stop fearing guilt and start seeing it as proof that you are moving forward. The price of growth is not guilt itself, but the courage to continue despite it. Familiarity will always ask you to stay. Growth will always ask you to leave. Guilt is simply the echo of what you are walking away from. And when you listen carefully, you will hear beneath it a quieter truth, one that reminds you that becoming more was always worth the cost. Silence often arrives before life begins to widen. It comes not as absence, but as a pause that feels unfamiliar, even unsettling. Many people mistake silence for stagnation, for being overlooked, for losing momentum. But silence is rarely empty. It is the space where something new gathers strength before it speaks. Expansion does not always announce itself with noise. Often it prepares itself in stillness. When the noise fades, it can feel like something has been taken away. Conversations slow, invitations lessen, external validation grows quiet. In this hush, the mind may rush to fill the gap with worry, questioning what went wrong. Yet silence is not a sign of regression. It is a sign of recalibration. Life is drawing your attention inward, asking you to listen more deeply than before. Silence removes distraction. Without constant input, you are left with your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own truth. This can be uncomfortable because distraction often shields you from self-examination. Silence does not allow escape. It invites honesty. In that honesty, clarity begins to form. Expansion needs clarity, and clarity requires quiet. There is a natural rhythm to growth, and silence is part of that rhythm. Just as fields lie fallow before producing a harvest, the human spirit needs periods of rest before it can expand. These periods may look unproductive on the surface, but internally, integration is happening. Lessons are settling, strength is consolidating, vision is taking shape. Silence also reveals dependency. When external voices fade, you may notice how much you relied on affirmation, guidance, or approval. This awareness is not meant to shame you. It is meant to free you. Expansion requires inner authority. Silence teaches you to trust your own discernment rather than constantly seeking confirmation from others. In silence, emotions rise that were previously drowned out. Unresolved grief, unspoken desires, quiet fears surface. This can feel overwhelming, but it is necessary. Expansion does not bypass emotion, it integrates it. Silence gives emotion the space to be acknowledged and released. What is faced can be transformed. What is avoided remains stuck. There is a particular loneliness that can accompany silence. When familiar voices disappear, it may feel as though you have been forgotten, but silence is not abandonment. It is refinement. It narrows your focus so you can distinguish between what is essential and what is merely noise. Expansion often requires a smaller audience at first. Silence also teaches patience. In a world that rewards immediacy, waiting can feel like failure, but expansion unfolds in its own time. Silence stretches your capacity to trust the process without visible evidence. It strengthens faith in what is forming beyond your current perception. During silent seasons, identity can feel uncertain. Without external roles and interactions to define you, you may question who you are becoming. This questioning is not confusion, it is transition. Old identities loosen before new ones solidify. Silence holds you in that in-between space where reinvention begins. Silence sharpens awareness. You begin to notice subtle shifts in your energy, your preferences, your boundaries. You realize what drains you and what nourishes you. Expansion requires this discernment. Without silence, these signals are easily ignored. There is also creativity born from silence. Ideas that were once drowned out by busyness find room to breathe. Imagination expands when the mind is not constantly occupied. Silence is fertile ground. It allows inspiration to rise naturally rather than being forced. Silence often precedes external change because it precedes internal alignment. Before life rearranges itself around you, it rearranges itself within you. This internal work is quiet but profound. It shifts your perspective, your priorities, your sense of self. When expansion finally arrives, it feels less like a surprise and more like a continuation of what has been quietly forming. It is tempting to rush through silence, to fill it with activity, just to feel productive. But doing so interrupts the process. Silence cannot be hurried. It asks for surrender rather than control. Expansion rewards those who allow silence to do its work. In silence, you also learn to listen to life differently. You become attuned to subtle guidance, to intuitive nudges that were previously overshadowed by noise. This listening becomes a skill that serves you long after the silent season ends. When silence eventually gives way to expansion, it becomes clear that nothing was wasted. The quiet strengthened you. It deepened your understanding. It prepared you to hold more without being overwhelmed. Expansion without silence would have been unstable. Silence ensured readiness. Understanding the role of silence changes how you experience it. Instead of fearing it, you begin to respect it. You recognize it as a necessary companion to growth, not an obstacle. Silence becomes a place of preparation rather than waiting. Expansion does not emerge from constant motion. It emerges from moments of stillness that allow intention to crystallize. Silence is not the absence of life, it is life gathering itself. And when the moment is right, what has been quietly forming will step forward, carrying the depth and strength that only silence can provide. Becoming is a quiet, internal process long before it becomes visible to the world. It reshapes your values, your boundaries, your way of seeing life, often without announcement. Because of this, not everyone will recognize who you are becoming. Some people only know the version of you that existed when their role in your life was clear. When that version begins to change, confusion arises, not because your growth is wrong, but because their understanding has stopped where your evolution began. People relate to you through memory. They remember who you were when they met you, how you showed up, what you tolerated, what you gave. As you become more aware, more intentional, more aligned, you shift beyond those memories. This shift can feel threatening to those who rely on familiarity. They may interpret your growth as distance, your boundaries as rejection, your silence as judgment. In truth, you are not moving away from them. You are moving toward yourself. Recognition requires readiness. Not everyone is prepared to see you beyond the role you once played. If you were the listener, your voice may feel unfamiliar when it begins to speak. If you were the supporter, your independence may feel unsettling when you no longer lean. Growth disrupts dynamics, and disruption often triggers resistance. This resistance is not always intentional. Sometimes it is simply the discomfort of having to update one's perception. There is a subtle grief in realizing that some people cannot meet you where you are going. You may still care deeply, still appreciate the history you share, still wish things could remain simple. But becoming is not about preserving simplicity. It is about honoring truth. When truth changes your shape, not everyone will recognize the new outline. Misunderstanding is a common companion of growth. When others cannot recognize your becoming, they may fill the gap with assumptions. They may say you have changed, as if change is a flaw rather than a function of living. They may question your motives, your loyalty, your authenticity. This can be painful, especially when it comes from those whose approval once mattered deeply. It is tempting to explain yourself endlessly in these moments, to translate your growth into language that feels comfortable to others. but becoming cannot always be explained. It is lived. Some people will only understand when they experience their own evolution. Until then, your explanations may fall flat, not because they lack clarity, but because the listener lacks perspective. Not everyone can recognize your becoming because recognition requires growth of their own. When you change, you mirror what is possible. This can inspire some and unsettle others. Those who are not ready to face their own stagnation may resist your progress, not consciously, but emotionally. Your growth becomes a reminder of what they have postponed. There is also the reality that some relationships were built around your limitations. When those limitations fall away, the relationship struggles to find its footing. This does not mean the connection was false. It means it was specific to a season. Becoming reveals whether a bond can adapt or whether it was dependent on who you used to be. Acceptance of being unrecognized is a crucial step in growth. When you stop seeking validation from those who cannot see you clearly, you reclaim energy. You learn to trust your internal compass rather than external confirmation. This trust does not harden you, it strengthens you. It allows you to continue becoming without constant self-doubt. There is freedom in realizing that recognition is not required for authenticity. You do not need to be understood to be real. You do not need permission to evolve. Your becoming is valid even when it is unseen. In fact, some of the most profound transformations happen in obscurity, away from applause and approval. Over time, the pain of being unrecognized softens. You begin to see it not as rejection, but as redirection. The people who cannot recognize your becoming are often not meant to walk with you into your next chapter. This understanding brings clarity rather than bitterness. There will also be those who surprise you, people who adjust their understanding, who grow alongside you, who recognize your becoming even when it challenges them. These connections deepen through mutual evolution. They are rare, but they are grounding. They remind you that growth does not always require separation, only honesty. Not being recognized can teach humility. It reminds you that becoming is not a performance. It is not about proving anything to anyone. It is about alignment with your own truth. When you release the need to be seen in a particular way, you become more present, more grounded, more free. As you continue to grow, you may look back at past versions of yourself with compassion rather than embarrassment. You recognize that each version served a purpose. Others may still see those versions when they look at you. This is not their failure, it is a difference in timing. Becoming is not a straight line, and recognition does not arrive all at once. Some will catch up, others will remain anchored to the past. Your task is not to drag them forward, but to walk your path with integrity. When you accept that not everyone can recognize your becoming, you stop shrinking to be familiar. You stop apologizing for your growth. You allow yourself to be fully present in who you are now, even if it unsettles those who remember you differently. This acceptance is not resignation, it is maturity. Your becoming is sacred. It deserves protection, patience, and trust. Those who can recognize it will meet you with curiosity and respect. Those who cannot will fade into memory. Both outcomes are part of the journey, and through it all, you continue becoming, not for recognition, but for truth. There comes a moment when resistance softens and acceptance takes its place. It is the moment you stop fighting the distance. Stop questioning every ending. Stop replaying what could have been different. In that moment, something shifts. When separation is no longer treated as an enemy, expansion begins to reveal itself as a natural consequence rather than a distant reward. Separation feels painful because it disrupts attachment. Attachment clings to what is known, even when what is known has stopped nourishing the soul. Acceptance loosens that grip. It does not erase sadness or memory, but it releases the belief that what left must be replaced by force. Acceptance creates openness, and openness is the doorway through which expansion enters. When you accept separation, you stop interpreting every ending as personal failure. You begin to see endings as transitions rather than verdicts. This change in perception is powerful. It shifts your energy from self-doubt to self-trust. Expansion does not thrive in self-blame. It thrives in clarity. There is a quiet strength in acceptance. It does not rush to fill the space left behind. It allows the space to exist without panic. In that allowance, you discover resilience you did not know you possessed. You realize that you can stand without what once felt essential. This realization expands your sense of self. Acceptance also returns energy that was trapped in resistance. Fighting separation consumes emotional resources. Questioning every decision drains clarity. Once you accept what has ended, that energy becomes available for creation. Expansion is fueled by freed energy. As acceptance settles in, perspective widens. You begin to see how certain connections, environments, or roles limited you, not intentionally, but structurally. They belonged to an earlier version of you. Separation did not remove something valuable, it removed a constraint. With the constraint gone, movement becomes easier. Expansion often begins internally before it becomes visible externally. After acceptance, your thoughts feel lighter. Your choices feel more intentional. Your boundaries strengthen without effort. This internal expansion is subtle but profound. It changes how you show up in the world. There is also an emotional expansion that follows acceptance. You become less reactive, less guarded. Having survived separation, you no longer fear loss in the same way. This does not make you detached, it makes you grounded. You engage more fully because you are no longer clinging. Acceptance creates room for new alignment. When you stop holding on to what has ended, you create space for what matches your current frequency. Expansion does not replace like for like. It introduces what resonates with who you are now, not who you used to be. Many people believe expansion requires effort, striving, or constant motion. But once separation is accepted, expansion often unfolds naturally. Opportunities appear without force. Connections form without chasing. Ideas emerge without strain. Acceptance aligns you with the flow of life rather than against it. There is a clarity that comes from understanding that separation was not an interruption, but a correction. It adjusted your path so expansion could occur without compromise. This understanding dissolves regret. You stop wishing you had stayed longer or tried harder. You see that leaving was part of arriving. Acceptance also reshapes your relationship with fear. When you have accepted separation, fear loses its leverage. You know that even if something ends, you will not collapse. This confidence expands your willingness to take risks aligned with your truth. Expansion follows courage, and courage grows from acceptance. With acceptance comes gratitude, not necessarily for the loss, but for the growth it made possible. Gratitude shifts focus from what was taken to what was gained. This shift magnifies expansion. What you appreciate expands, and what you resist persists. As you move forward, you notice that your world feels larger, not because there is more around you, but because there is more within you. Your capacity to understand, to empathize, to imagine increases. Expansion is not only about external success, it is about internal spaciousness. Acceptance does not mean forgetting. Memories remain, lessons remain, but they no longer anchor you to the past. They become reference points rather than destinations. Expansion requires this distinction. You can carry wisdom without carrying weight. There is an inevitability to expansion once acceptance takes root. Life responds to openness. When you stop closing yourself around what has ended, life meets you with new beginnings. These beginnings may arrive quietly, but they arrive steadily. Acceptance also refines your discernment. Having experienced separation, you become more intentional about what you allow into your life. You choose alignment over attachment. This selectivity does not limit you, it strengthens your expansion. Eventually, you realize that separation was never meant to diminish you, it was meant to reveal your capacity. Acceptance turns separation from a wound into a doorway. And once you walk through that doorway, expansion is no longer a question of if, but when. The moment you truly accept what has ended, you stop living in reaction. You start living in creation. Expansion follows creation as naturally as breath follows release. What you become after acceptance is not smaller, not broken, not lacking. You become wider, deeper, and more whole than before. One day, you will look back and realize the distance was not the ending. It was the doorway. You were not being pushed away from life. You were being pulled toward it. So let go with grace. Step forward with faith. And remember this truth. Growth demands separation before expansion. And everything you are becoming is worth the space it requires.